NGO, CUFA, Credit Union Foundation of Australia. But for my one talk in Papua New Guinea, they may have heard or know of CUFA, and also my friends in Cambodia. I'm not sure if I have any colleagues in here right now. Oh, fantastic. Lovely. And localisation, we're all talking about it in some way, but I'm a little concerned that we're perhaps not all hearing the same thing. And I know there's been a few sessions on localisation, but in and of itself, I don't think that represents a bad thing. It's a topic we should be talking more about and placing more front and centre. And today, we tap into an approach that touches on some experiences in different countries and through some different lenses. So if you come away with perhaps a few more questions and answers in your mind, that's okay. We want this to be a rolling conversation. And we've chosen to link localisation with inclusion with a very sort of clear sort of question, I guess, or focus in mind. And I'm going to refer to something here. I like to sort of tap into the sciences as a way to kind of try and shed a bit of fresh light on some questions that we grapple with in the development space. And I came across Isaac Newton's lesser-known fourth law. You've probably heard of some of his other ones, but this law, it talks about forces that add up like vectors. Now, it's okay if you're looking at me blankly going, I have no idea what he just said. It's good. At least you're listening. So it actually has a very fancy name, and I'll give it to you just so you can show off afterwards to everyone. And it's called the principle of superposition. Now, you're probably even more confused right now. That's fine, because at heart, I'm quite a simple person. I like to use stories and examples to illustrate my point. So a really good example is waves in motion. And think of like two waves overlapping, and when they come together, that change kind of reflects both those waves. So if you're at the beach and you're watching that large wave rolling in the shore, and at the same time there's a wave rolling back out, and they come together, and there's that massive explosion. And hopefully it's your friend and not you who's caught in the middle of that. And today we want to leave you with a view of the untapped potential, some of the new aspects to localisation that we can harness to drive even greater momentum forward. And we think that if you can tap into and promote localisation with JEDC, we can actually generate that amplification. Now, it's not synergy, it's amplification, that we can create this superposition. You're going to be going on a ride. I promised you that. Yeah? So we have an esteemed panel, and I'll start by briefly introducing them and then give you a little bit of a sense of how the format will flow from here. Alex, who's at the High Commission of Canada in Australia, and I know her in her capacity as the manager of the Canada Fund for Local Initiatives, CFLI, which some of you may have heard of. And she's been managing this for some time. And I have to say, reflecting on my 20 years in the sector, we all have our own scars and war stories about interfacing with donors, and perhaps some of you in the audience are also donors. Alex brings the most incredible openness and so grounded, and she's happy to fly the kites, and see where the breeze takes them. It's okay. See, they don't quite know either, so everyone's on their toes with me. David has joined us from CUFA, Head of Cooperation, Pacific Island Countries Global Affairs Canada. Yeah, it's a big title. He carries a lot of weight on his broad shoulders. It's only been 24 hours, but I can faithfully say, he embodies those Canadian values. Yeah, that warmth, he'll invite you in. He's very, there's no sort of nothing off limits. Yeah, and it's that sort of open-mindedness that I think it's a good thing that it's coming into the Pacific. And, we like to focus on some of those bigger powers and what they're doing. But you see there's some silver lining and there's some green shoots as well, because it's a great thing to have a new, open and positive donor, ready to roll up the sleeves and learn and then do good things. Corin, he's our contractor representative from SMEC, no less. Now, I'd like to say with Corin, big presence and an even bigger energy. And the great thing with Corin is that he's never met a mountain that he hasn't been able to climb. And he looks up from that top and gazes out to that horizon. And it's pretty special, not to be constrained by some of the day-to-day cut and thrust that managing contractors often, find themselves in. And finally, Rany, who hopefully we can pop up on the screen. So Rany is the CUFA, Cambodia Country Manager. And as you can instantaneously straight away see, an absolute breath of fresh air. The smile is infectious. Anything or everything that I throw at her, she steps up and she delivers tenfold. And I could go on, but I won't, because we need to hear from these folk. But I just want to finish before I sort of start posing the questions to say, these forums, I've attended, I think, 4 now, and we know who the big names are in our sector. Those big speakers, and they deliver the keynotes and so on. And hopefully this resonates with some of you. Some of the best change comes from the quiet achievers. The people who have that moral clarity and they just do the hard work without looking for that big recognition. And that is the panel that we have assembled here today. So we're very privileged, and I'm honoured to facilitate this conversation. So we're going to try and create a bit of an interactive dynamic. I'm going to pose the question to our first organisation, first 2 panel members, and then we open up for a little bit of a chat here. If you want to jump in with any questions, I am a terrible timekeeper, so someone's going to have to pull me up. And then we'll jump, new question, and we're going to just slowly go down. We start at a very strategic or high level. We get a little bit of that framework, and then we start to just go down, and then we get into the delivery side and some examples of what CUFA is doing. So that's the journey that we're about to embark on. And there may be a few twists and turns along the way, but it's all good. Yeah, it's all good. So to our friends from Global Affairs Canada, if you could share, what are some best practices for donors to respond to the drivers of localisation, particularly in terms of understanding the priorities and capacities of local civil society organisations?
There, lights are on. Got past the first hurdle. Well, thank you for that very big question, but also for that very warm introduction. I'm just hoping that we can live up to the expectations. You've set the bar pretty high. So the pressure's on. But before I answer the question, I would really like to just get a sense of who is here in the audience and who I'm speaking to. This is my first time to attend this Australian Development Forum. So curious to get a breakdown of who's in the government, private sector, academia, or civil society. So starting with who's in government like myself, who are the government people here? Well, there's not many, just a few of us, eh? How about private sector? Okay, a few more. Civil society? Not as many as other, and academia. Okay. And I think there's a few people that didn't raise their hand. Is that the UN? UN, maybe? Yeah. Okay, there's some okay, UN. Okay. Yeah. And well, civil society, I was lumping NGO, civil society together. So anybody else I missed? Oh, multilaterals. Yes, of course, the multilateral banks. They got a couple? Oh, okay. Yeah, okay. Good. Yeah. Okay. Well, good. I'll try to tailor my answers to a very general audience then, because it seems to be very, very, very general. So back to the question, let me start with explaining how I feel localization intersects with inclusion, or JEDC, and why these two issues are so important, as Darian so eloquently alluded to with that Newton theory. I'll then talk a little bit about what donor practice has been one of the biggest drivers, or what I feel has been one of the biggest drivers for localization. And also talk a little bit about what donor practice has been one of the biggest obstacles for localization, and there'll be a little bit of a twist. And then I'll hand it over to Alex, who actually does all the hard work and actually will be able to speak about how that is actually working on the ground a little bit more. So let me start with, how does localization intersect with inclusion, or JEDC? How are these two things the same? Well, we all know that the key for any development project to succeed is about local ownership. If without local ownership, as soon as the donor leaves, the project dies. Doesn't matter how great your project idea is. You need to have that local ownership there. And this is not new. You all know that. And donors have known that, and we, to address this, we've demanded letters. We said, yes, before you get your project approved, you have to have a letter from the national government, and, and provincial governments, and municipal, tribal councils, village elders. We just kept demanding more letters. But we were finding some improvements with all this additional ownership, but there were still people being left behind. Like, we still weren't capturing, the women were being left behind, the indigenous, the LGBTQ community, and we needed to do something different. So I think, this is where JEDC, inclusion, comes in. And with that, we started to see donors and our project partners were able to tailor their approach to the local aspects in a way that integrated those that were most disenfranchised, the most vulnerable. And so what you're hearing is, JEDC is the tool that helps you tailor your approach to the local situation. They're synonymous, JEDC, localization. You can't do localization without JEDC in an effective way. They need to come together. So that's, in essence, why I feel they're one and the same, they're a package deal, and why they're so important. So having said that, does anyone here want to guess what I feel has been the greatest policy driver from the donors for localization? The hint was in there, if anybody was listening. If I haven't put you to sleep in that post-lunch days. Gender, Gen Z. Yeah, it's inclusion. It's all these policies for inclusion. These policies, depending on which donor you talk to, some call it GBA plus, some call it SOGIESC analysis, your gender analysis. all of these demands have been a big drive for localization. And they've enabled us as donors and the development community to develop projects that are doing a better job of not just, working through the government authorities, but are able to capture those that are most marginalized, those that are most at risk. And I think this is why I have found JEDC and inclusion to be one of the biggest drivers, because donors have made this a donor requirement. Now, having said that, I'm wondering if anybody can guess what the biggest obstacle is. I think it's the way we've done it. It's the way we've implemented it. We've made it a donor requirement. And I think that's what most people have heard. They just hear, oh, it's a donor requirement. Oh, God. They're putting together their proposal. They got this great idea, but the donor now wants a gender analysis. So what do? They hire a gender advisor. They send her off to write a couple pages, to give the donor whatever they want, 10, 20 pages, whatever you need. We'll attach as an annex. We'll submit the proposal. We'll get our project approved, and we'll do whatever the hell we'll get on with our project. And if the donor has a problem, they can talk to the gender advisor. But it wasn't really integrated within our projects. There was no ownership. It was a top-down, donor-driven requirement. And so I think that's been one of our biggest obstacles in how to do this. But before I go on, I have to say, not all our partners were like that. Some of our partners really got it. And I don't want to be critical of the entire development community on not embracing JEDC principles. I think there's many of our partners, majority, have actually embraced it and have been able to do it and do it well. And if you're looking for a question to ask, I could probably go on a little bit. I'm worried about my time count because Alex, I got to save some time for Alex. But you can ask me a question about how can donors do that. So I can plant you with that question if you're thinking you need to ask a question. But with that, I'll hand it over to Alex, and she can tell you how it's done.
Sure. So yeah, as has been mentioned, I work at the High Commission of Canada here in Canberra. I usually start these sort of things by apologising for not actually being Canadian or sounding Canadian. Maybe apologising is kind of Canadian anyway. An honorary. But I manage the Canada Fund for Local Initiatives in 7 of the Pacific Island countries. So Papua New Guinea, Solomon Islands, Vanuatu, Nauru, Palau, Federated States of Micronesia, and Marshall Islands. And the Canada Fund is basically a grant that is specifically aimed at local civil society organisations. It bears a striking resemblance to DFAT's direct aid program, if anyone's familiar with that, but there's a couple of differences. So the Canada Fund has been around for about 50 years. So on one hand, it has been part of Canada's international assistance program that has really focused on local civil society organisations. However, recently, kind of just from the mission here in Canberra, we've been looking at how our rules and regulations and our tools and processes, we've been looking at, I guess, the way we use those in the fund and seeing if they're really fit for purpose for the organisations that we're trying to support through the Canada Fund. So I'd say one of the biggest things that popped out at us, particularly in the day-to-day management of the program, was how local organisations interacted with our application process, particularly the budget template. So we're often finding that the budget template, whilst being a pretty standard donor template, was often not well understood if you were applying for your first grant or you didn't just have a lot of experience yet with donor processes, which is what the Canada Fund was trying to get to. So an incomplete or an incorrect budget would either completely kind of stop an organisation from getting funding, or it would slow the process down and create questions and probably not kind of be the best experience for a local organisation. I think this became particularly an issue during COVID because during COVID we did get a lot more funds to spend, which was good news, but we had to spend them quite quickly. And I think at that point, we probably, as a donor, lent a little bit too much on international organisations, and because we knew that they could complete the paperwork and kind of take the money and do good projects. But from a Canada Fund perspective, that's not really the spirit of the fund that is aimed at local civil society organisations. So last year in 2023, we launched a pilot project where we integrated budget training into the application process. So the Canada Fund has a two-step application process. It starts with a call for concept notes, which is a short 1 to 2 page form. We usually get somewhere between 1 to 200 of those. And then of those, we invite kind of 25 to 50 to complete a full application and budget. And so last year we started, as we were inviting local CSOs to complete that full application and budget, we also invited them to complete a 4-week online budget training course. So the course was with a training organisation in the States called Humentum, and it was called something like Budgeting Essentials for NGOs. So the idea was that it would be a little bit like an open book test. So that as you've been given this budget template, you were then given some support and some tools to be able to do that. So as we were going into this, drawing on something Dave said in his presentation, we had 3 key questions. And so I think the first one was, is this something that local CSOs will actually want? Or are we just creating another donor demand a hoop to jump through? The second question was, if organisations did want to do this, was it accessible? So did they have enough internet access and also time in their day, noting that we were kind of giving them this surprise course? And the third question was the course itself, like, was it fit for purpose? And so it's now in its second year, so we haven't done any formal evaluation yet. We are going to run it again next year, and we're hoping to also get another mission somewhere in the world involved to see how it goes in another geographic area. But from the feedback forms I've seen so far, I'd see that local CSOs have really appreciated the initiative, and there seems to be a lot of enthusiasm for this model of incorporating training into the application process. So going back to the original question, I think when donors are looking to support more locally led development, looking at the regulations and the processes and tools that you use is really important if we are to support local CSOs.
Thanks for that. And tying that all together is this idea of shifting from localisation as an agenda being imposed to one that is more of a dynamic or an organic process, and building up and investing over time in not only local CSOs delivering projects, but also those systems and those processes. And that's the key difference with this approach, which is it's supporting both now and tomorrow. It's such an important step, and one which I'm hoping each of you in your various capacities, your various roles, take away and think and find a way in which you can shift a bit of that dial, because it's going to take an ecosystem approach. And I am hogging the microphone again. So, Corin, any response reflections to what our Canadian colleagues shared?
No, I'll probably respond when I come from it from my perspective, from a business perspective. But I mean, one thing that I think resonates is your sort of practical lens at it and trying to look at it from the viewpoint of the applicant and the recipient. I think it's very easy for applications to be just written by the organization who's offering, rather than saying, right, if I'm in the other seat, what's it like? So I think that practical application is really important. Yeah, that's it.
At this point in time, before we move on, obviously we can come back at the end. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Actually, I just want to hear the specific part of what you just mentioned, like what is different between the organization that is the applications made by the organizations who's offering and the business. What do you think that is the big disparity between the two?
So the question for Corin?
No, it's okay. It's okay. Were you asking what the difference is?
Because you just mentioned that it's quite important that to really bring in the business perspective into this application. Like if it's the business people doing it, how would they do it differently in terms of applications or other aspects of the process?
Okay. So what I was really saying is if you're, what I think has been done here is saying if you're applying for funding, for example, applications, are they being designed to be easy or more understandable to fill out in a practical way? Because it's very easy to think that what you're asking as a donor is understandable, but to many people, particularly in a localization context, it might not be. So the answers might not be relevant or answering the specific question.
And maybe if I could just add, I mean, I was speaking about gender equality and inclusion and how it intersects with localization, but I know Alex's demonstration was about this financial policy, but it's not so much that it was about budgeting. It was about the process in which we worked with the local organizations. It was engaging them in the rolling out of this policy on the new budget so that we're not just doing a top-down approach. We're engaging, there's some ownership by the local organizations. And in this case, at the Canada Fund, I mean, these are small organizations, like we're community-based organizations. We're talking about grants of 25 to 50,000 Canadian dollars. Sorry, that's small for my program, which works in millions. Some people I know 25,000 is a lot, but it's relatively small compared to much of the World Bank projects or something like that. And I think what we're looking at is how can we better engage our clients who happen to be civil society, NGOs, academia, private sector, to work with us on improving our policies, and so that there's ownership on the policies, and it's not just another donor requirement and a box to check.
Go ahead. I don't know if there's a microphone.
That's okay. That's okay. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, I'm just wondering, given what you've just mentioned, noting that several of your countries were Micronesia, what the uptake was for the training. In a lot of the countries that we work in, we are working with quite small and very under-resourced departments. So I'm just sort of curious who felt they had the 4 weeks to undertake the training.
From memory, it was pretty good, but so the 2 years we've ran it, there has been a couple organizations that have dropped off and then not submitted their application in the end. So one of my questions has been, if they don't have time to do this course, do they then feel like they can't submit their application in the end, which I suspect might be happening. But in general, of a 25 cohort, I'd say at least, just off the top of my head, at least 20 are kind of getting through. But interestingly, we're still kind of going through the numbers, but there was quite a big difference. It's also like how much of the course someone will complete. So we had a much higher, like 100% course completion rate this year than we did last year. But what was also interesting from last year was that we had people not fully completing the course, but they were still giving us really good feedback saying, this is the first time I've ever done anything like this. So maybe completing the first 2 modules was still helpful for them. Hopefully that answers.
Was there another hand? There is that.
I'm David Poulton from Alinea International. I just had a question. So I guess noting that it's probably unlikely that all applicants are going to be successful in receiving funding in the end, has this training been set up in a way that it's able to still benefit those people who aren't successful? So is it accredited elsewhere, or is it applicable to other donors other than GAC?
It's not accredited to anywhere, but it is set up in a way so that even if you don't get funding, you're still getting the course because it is kind of before applications are assessed. But the course is kind of a generic budgeting essentials for NGOs. So it should in theory be helping those organisations get better at responding to different donor templates.
Let's maybe continue on, and I'm just going to follow on this to say Alex is being humble as always. So it falls to me, the extrovert among us, to just say, which is Canada puts its money where its mouth is, and I came to her with one of my many raw ideas, which then we fashioned in fire and iron, and we've launched recently in Papua New Guinea and Solomon Islands the Pacific Capacity for Growth project. And my team is rolling out a series of face-to-face, module-based, a holistic training package to equip, it's 15 civil society organisations in total, and it's from various provinces of Papua New Guinea and Solomon Islands, so not just urban focused, another donor tendency. And they're prepared to roll the dice. And, you know, we talk about risk and we talk about failure, but it does seem to vanish, disappear into the background when localisation, all of a sudden with localisation, we demand results and immediate results, and we're going to test that success in a way that we never really, it's a standard we never apply to some of our friends in the multilateral space, even the managing coordinator space. We allow a bit more time, to incubate and promote. And it'd be great to see more of this flourish through the donor side. And it is a roll of the dice. I'm going to pass to Corin and pose our next question, which takes us to Indonesia, and we've had strong Indonesian sort of focus during this conference. So we're continuing with that thread. And Corin, can you share what local-led development looks like for SMEC in Indonesia?
Okay, thanks, Darian. And we've got a very mixed audience. I hope we'll get into some good conversation in a minute. So the perspective I'm coming from is very much the private sector, sort of managing contractor, advisory firm side. So just to give you a little bit of perspective, SMEC is part of a global company called Surbana Jurong. So we operate all over the world. Most of our work is non-donor work, but I come from a background of development work. So I run the international development part of our business. So that's servicing multilaterals, bilaterals. So I've also served on the IDCC's locally led development working group. So it's something very close to my heart. I've lived and worked in emerging markets for the last 30 years. So I've worked across all sorts of teams and with all sorts of colleagues from different backgrounds. So I guess I'll start with the end, with the conclusion first, is that localization, diversity, it works, and it's a no-brainer for business. It really is a no-brainer. And when I sit in conferences like this, and, you know, localization is the new big topic that we all want to talk about, I just hope we go beyond and I think we are, beyond the talking to the really seeing it as a no-brainer, even in development and with development programs. And I think we see examples of that, but I think there's a long way to go, and I think we're all having the right conversations. But I think it will take a lot more risk appetite from donors to actually get there, because it's quite a leap of change in way of working, but we'll come back to that. So when I look at either Indonesia or any country in which we're operating, they are our local companies. They're owned by a group, but they're companies in their own right in the country in which they're operating. They're led by their in-country staff, and then we use global expertise, fly in and out as we need it. But in essence, for all sorts of reasons, those companies only operate in those markets because they are locally led. They understand the market, they understand the opportunities, they understand the problems we're trying to solve. So we're a construction and design and supervision company. So we're not actually pouring concrete, but we're doing a lot of work on whether it's renewable energy, whether it's highways, dams, that sort of thing for multilaterals in Indonesia particularly. So when we entered the market in Indonesia about 30 years ago, I think, we joined forces with a local firm that now has blended into our operations there, and it's similar in PNG. We have an operating company there that's run locally, led locally, and then they'll tell us or tell the global pool of expertise what they need. So I think it's a slightly different perspective than looking from the sort of design of a program forward in terms of localization. It's saying, well, we're actually, as a private sector entity in a country, we're looking at both the private sector market there and the donor market and responding to those opportunities. And I think it's, if we take it from responding, and it goes to your point, if we're responding to donor opportunities, that's where our local companies come unstuck a bit, because they don't either have the requirements the donor is asking from particular key positions in a program. So it's suddenly actually the hardest part. It might be similar work that they do for private sector clients in that country, but they can't respond to the donor wants because they don't have the specific requirements necessarily that the donor is asking for. Someone with 20 years experience in country ABC. So our conversations often when we're talking to donors and multilaterals say, can we adopt a slightly more, can you adopt a slightly more flexible way to engage the private sector in delivery or in tendering? And I think that's a debate that needs to happen alongside the localization, JEDC, all of that debate, because unless we get that right, there's that tension about, always providing expats into a country. We've got to break that somehow. And I think there are ways to do it, but it's going to take time and a slightly different way of working for the development industry as a whole and collective, be it the private sector, be it donors, be it NGOs. And I think that's even more fundamental when we're talking of localization and JEDC. It's riskier. It's going to take more appetite from the donors to take more risks and give more responsibility into the countries. And I think that's really fundamental. And as a development sort of coalition of people, it's going to take us all to think through how one really starts to shift from a more donor country perspective into the recipient country perspective and the private sector in that country and how the markets operate there and respond, be it civil society, be it consulting firms, engineering firms, whatever. But it's a different view of doing things. And I think we heard in the Mitchell oration earlier, it's for, haven't done a particularly good job for the last 50 years. Let's, don't continue to do the same thing over and over again. So I think from our side, as from a business perspective, it's if you look right across all our operations globally, and then from a personal experience when I've worked across sub-Saharan Africa, where you have diverse teams, where you have locally led teams, it works. It really works, and it's that local problem solving needs to be solved locally, and it really does. And then bring in resources as you need, but I just think we're at a stage now where the localization debate needs to move from being sort of a donor debate to talk about more what works for a particular country. And I think it will naturally evolve from there. So certainly as a business, we're always looking at ways we can move our teams across countries, regions, so that they all get experiences. Donors do the same. But it really does work when you get that sort of people-centric side of localization right. It's about the people. And I think the other part of the debate we're having at the moment, the part that I think we're slightly weak on, is the people part. We all want to talk of tools and methodologies, but ultimately it's very much about the people and cultures and that dynamic at the same time. So I'd be interested to hear other people's perspective. Yeah, thank you.
We have a hand. Sorry.
Thank you very much. Chris Rodwell from Australia's CSIRO. Just really interested in terms of, you mentioned donors need to take some more risks, or they certainly need to be more flexible. Government donors tend to be in the main fairly risk averse for obvious reasons. So any ways that you can kind of break that nexus? Is it a slow and steady sort of pressure on that? Is it working with individuals who are a little bit more nimble or comfortable with that level of risk, particularly in those risk-averse organisations or that provide the money?
Very good question, and there's no simple answer. But I think from a risk, yeah, I mean most governments and bilaterals or multilateral, yes, it's risk aversion. But I think there's a different way of looking at things that could say, well, are we being appropriate in our risk analysis of a country or what we're trying to do, and not being so fearful of when things go wrong, just stop doing them. Learn from that. It's not about just keeping on doing it because you've given the money or because you've got a 5-year program. If it's not working, pivot it or whatever you want to do or close it down. But I think it's the tendency of many bureaucracies to not shift as you go along, rather to stick to a design you might have done 3 years ago. Well, the world moves faster than that. So I think it's, and again, it would be about more engagement locally way before you provide the money to really get the right solution at that point in time for the problem you're trying to address. Not sort of saying, right, we've got to do the design really fast because we've got to get it out in the next quarter. And I think that's and that's where I'm saying I think we need to really think through the process and get that right. And then I think things like localization and more appropriate solutions to problems would fit into that. Because at the moment, I think it tends to be, or seemingly to me, the design phase particularly tends to sort of be rushed and not very engaging of recipient countries. And I think that's a real area we could improve on to get more value. Does that answer your question?
One of those risk-adverse donors sitting at the table. I might just, you're absolutely right. I mean, we're going to continue to be, as long as there's journalists out there willing to jump on every mistake you make, and our ministers being held accountable for the mistakes that small public servants make thousands of miles away, there will be a lot of risk aversion. That being said, there are programs within Global Affairs Canada. I'm sure Australia has their own. The Canada Fund is a perfect example of that. It's very small. It's very nimble. $25,000 to $50,000. It can take on risks that my program working in the 5 to 10 million can't take on. We also have IDRC, the International Development Research Canada. They do a lot of innovative research projects, usually up to $1 million, so they can be fairly big. But really trying to find these innovative development initiatives around the world. I just came from an interesting workshop where they were looking at edible oysters. You eat edible pearls, it was called. Oysters are obviously edible. When I first heard it, I was thinking you were eating the pearls, but I thought it was tapioca. But it was, there are these programs that are willing to take on that risk. And we also have our Peace Ops program. I think they've changed their name. I've been away from headquarters for a few months, but who work in these more risk unstable areas in conflict affected zones. So I think there is room for that within, but we have to think of scales. You have to think about piloting, and you have to remember that, as you say, if you're looking at doing something very new and innovative, you might want to just propose a pilot and say, look, let's try this out for a couple of years. If it doesn't work, we'll go out. But at least you'll have a little more success convincing a donor to take a little bite as opposed to a big bite of something that could be pretty risky.
All right. So there's a collective challenge, and I want each of us to take away from today, how do we get localization from, I say, for want of a better word, margins or periphery, more or increasingly into the centre? And I don't know if others share a certain underlying concern I have, which is that donors will contemplate and kind of engage with localization to the extent that it actually isn't going to shift some of that core scaffolding for how the big programs are conceived and delivered. And I certainly can't rest easy, you know, with the sense that we tried and we got as far as we could, but we'll kind of just leave it operating at this level, and maybe we dial up a little the volume or flow of grants to local CSOs, but only certain actors or institutions can somehow ever hold the reins. And we are a little bit, you know, history can be difficult when you're in the midst of it. And, you know, we've got one eye in the rearview mirror. You know, old ways and means of doing aid are sort of slowly disappearing in the rearview mirror. But all we've got that lies ahead is just through that front windscreen. And it's not a long gaze that you have. And maybe what we collectively need is a bit of a GPS, a bit of a map. So it can help signpost what does progress look and feel like in a localisation and inclusion space. And that's why, in part, I wanted a panel that brought us together to know we all have a bit of a shared responsibility, all of us. And you know, these are active debates that are certainly happening in civil society. And I'm sure on some level, you know, within sort of donor forums, and IDCC and managing contractors, but how are we cross-fertilising? Because if we're each hatching our own perfectly conceived plans, but never actually sharing with one another, then there's a fair degree of risk we're either going to end up in cul-de-sacs or going around roundabouts. And that's the future that I certainly don't want to see come to pass. And if we arrive at a point where we talk about the failed localisation agenda and that emerges as the theme, well, today was an opportunity for us to reset, yeah, and for us to try and double down on how we can do localisation better and map it as a way forward. So I would hate in 5 years' time to be back here and possibly entertaining any notion like that. So I will now bring in our third panel member. Rany's been very patiently listening, and now we get to give her the floor. I don't want to say saving the best till last, but I may have. And I'll put to you, Rany, how can localisation approaches be tailored to address cultural norms and values in Cambodia to best promote gender equality and disability inclusion? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, perfectly.
Okay. So thank you for the question and the opportunity for me to talk here. And let me address some keyword to the question that Darian has mentioned. Localization approach. This approach is very important because we can integrate and mobilize local voice and need. The donor priority may not fit well with the local context. So it doesn't mean that you have one big fish and you bring in and then you think that everyone like fish, like to eat fish. So we have to learn what they like and what can be fit well to the resource and capacity of the local. So localization approach is a must. That is very important in order to benefit and implement your project well. Another one is, let me talk about the cultural norm. As we know, every country has their own and unique culture. In Cambodia, in Cambodia, we have one saying, say that, I speak Khmer because I think maybe some Cambodian are sitting in that room as well. So this is the cultural norm that can be the barrier for women, that they cannot do anything further, better, higher, because the woman, it seems like, only be able to move around the kitchen, doing the housework, cleaning, cooking, taking care of the children, and taking care of the family. Cannot do other thing that is bigger or higher decision-making position. So it is a shape that barrier the woman to pursue even those the education to higher. So in Cambodia, you know, this is very important, that they keep the woman just doing things that is not really, really good, really, really high, and their voice not really heard because of this norm that happened in Cambodia, which means that the men, they are treated as a goal, and women, they treated like a fish pest, like prohok in Khmer word. So this reduced women's ability to make the decision. Even in the family, they cannot have a very big voice. So for women, culture has told that no need to learn. You will not do any other thing that is good. You just be a mother in the future. You cannot go far. You cannot do things as the men do. It's the culture in Cambodia. So cultural norm, we need to understand. And one more, let me address the GETC. So we all think that everyone should be included in the decision making, social participation, professional development, or education and opportunity, that no one should be left behind because of their gender or their disability. Everyone should be included to benefit the project. So any project intervention should include everyone to be benefited. But it hasn't been the reality in Cambodia, with women afforded less opportunity to learn or work, while people living with disability have been regarded having lower status. For example, I give you one example. One big hot pot that tastes very well, it needs every small ingredient to be mixed. So it means that everyone in the community, in the country, should be included. Their voice should be heard. This is the meaning of GETC, that in their daily activity or in the project intervention community, and even though in the country development, everyone should be equally, should be included. So besides this, let me connect this idea to our livelihood project that CUFA implemented in Cambodia. We implement one livelihood project called the Australian Social Program for Inclusive Rural Enterprise. In short, we say ASPIRE. So this project has been implemented in 2 provinces in Cambodia, in Kampong Cham province and Tabong Khmum province. So to implement this project, we use the localization approach. We aim to address the cultural norms and value as well as to promote gender equality and disability inclusion. We truly work with community people to understand the community need. And, we engage with the local authority before we form the community enterprise. So based on localization approach, we came up with 3 different concepts of the livelihood, which is needed and for everyone inclusion, such as marginalized women and the people living with disability. So you will not be able to participate or address the idea of an inclusive program without a local-led approach to address their value, their need, and participation to keep growing when you graduate your project activity. You cannot stay there for a long time or forever. You need to graduate and move to the other or other reason. So it needs to be sustainable after your graduation. So CUFA decided to enable 3 community types to respond to the need we have found in 2 provinces. This decision was made from various stakeholder consultation, community itself, for better participation and sustainability. Actually, CUFA took the lead to generate the idea, but not in the position to talk or to tell to the community what to do, to the community what to lead. But the community had to provide the initiative idea for their community development by themselves. However, the livelihood for the community is fully engaged from the local community. This is how CUFA implement its project. So let me share you the first about the 3 types of CSE that CUFA have produced in the 2 provinces. Let our teams to share the first picture because I logged in via my phone. I cannot see it. Yes, thank you. So this is the chicken CSE. Her name is Jun Kia. She is the CSE leader. So this CSE was set up in Tebong Khmum province and established in January 2023. Have 3 active members, include 1 disability man. So the group of women, they have the benefit, they have the opportunity to strengthen their livelihood with the project to gain extra income and skill. They can share the lesson, they can listen to each other's voice, concern when they have the opportunity to have the monthly meeting together under our project coordinator coordination. So they share the concern. They also have the opportunity to share the technical skill that they raise the chicken. And they can get extra income that is very important for the woman beside their farming work. As you know, the farming work now have a lot of problems related to the climate change. So this is the extra income that they can have. And this is established by generating the initiative idea from the community itself. We mobilize, we learn what is their concern, what they need, what is the capacity of the community that they can manage and lead by themselves. So for this CSE, for example, even though in the future CUFA graduate, they can continue to do the job to raise the chicken in their community in order to benefit their family. See? Now let me share the second one. Please share the second picture. Yeah, this is the soap production CSE in Kampong Cham province. It was established in 2022 and have 8 members. Among 8 members, there are 5 already that they are disability. And currently, the situation of this CSE, they are doing very well in terms of sale, marketing, customer acquisition, finding additional sales partner, as well as good relationship with all the other NGO and also the local authority. Because they have a good relationship with the NGO, they are so trademark now being recognized to use in their community and supported by the local authority. So previously, these women rely on their family. They just rely on their family. But now they gain the independence and recognition by the developing their skill, making selling soup. Before, their disability, just depending on the family, cannot do anything and cannot earn their income. But now, you see, they have the skill. They are recognized that they are a group of strong women that can produce the soap and share it to the community. So the community can benefit from the local product that is cheap, high quality, and produced by a group of marginalized women that they never imagined that they have this skill before. So, after COVID, the soap is very important that the community need in order to clean. So these women produce that for their community. And more than that, they have the idea of recycle the used bottle. So they also reduce the plastic bottle that throw away in the community become a waste, but they refill it. That's not only the benefit, but it comes to the mindset that you know how to keep the environment clean. So maybe the community never imagined before that a group of illiterate women, and then they can have the skill, and then they have the idea of clean the environment in the community. So now they are very well known and recognized by the community, include a high quality of their product as well. And this idea also, we generate from the community what is the need by the localization approach. Okay, let me share you the last one. This group is led by a woman as well, and it is established in 2013 in Tabong Khmum province. So women, normally they migrate from their village to work in Phnom Penh city as a garment worker. But this CSE provides them the opportunity that they gain the skill, they get the income, and they can stay home to take care of the family. So they don't need to migrate, but they have the opportunity as well. They can come to work nearby their village and get a skill. So, without migration, it's very important for the family because the woman, like I mentioned before, it seemed like they were treated as the one who cannot move around the kitchen, but the woman play a very important role in the house. So when women don't migrate, they can have a lot. Besides working at home and after finish all the housework, they set a time to come to learn and to get the skill from this CSE. So the norm that I have mentioned that kitchen, a woman cannot move around the kitchen, but now it seems like it is not really true that these women are equipped with the skill, with the tailoring skill that can help them to provide enhancing their capacity and to earn extra income and also have enough time for their family. So all the CSE types that I have mentioned, not only the skill related to their specific CSE, but they also receive, the training on financial literacy, bookkeeping, income management, and business planning as well. So it means that more than just a core skill that they get. So CSE participation builds skill, income, community participation, training opportunity, and professional enhancement. Let me conclude this. Affecting programming embed both local need and understanding of cultural norm. So localization also must be ongoing progress as well as need and priority of community naturally change over the time. As we say, everything keep changing, right? Only the change that never change. So Aspire support traditionally excluded members of community to engage in community planning and making decisions. So, and importantly, we have seen a shift toward more inclusive social norm for women and people living with disability. Because of the shift, that's why there are many Cambodian in the room, there were female that they continue their master program in Australia. If they continue to listen to the cultural norm that women cannot move around the kitchen, they cannot fly there. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Rany. Very eloquent. You know, in CUFA, we see a missing middle. You know, on one side, there's aspiration at an individual level, community level, a national level, and the other side, opportunity. And what localization invites us to do, compels us to do, is to say, who's framing the aspirations? Which voices are we seeking to understand and listen to? And on the flip side, what opportunities are we imposing or making available? And how are we linking the two? And we just gave a brief illustration here of going in, opening up that space, and then responding. So it's not complex, but it does make us all work outside of the comfort zones that we've been schooled in, we've been raised in. And you know, particularly the further you get from the communities where you work, those voices fade and they become more distant. And so in a small way, we all need to pick up the megaphone. Yeah, we need to amplify, we need to project those voices and ensure they're as front and center as possible. And that's what gets us out of bed every day. And you as well need to think, well, when I see the end of my career, you know, in the development space, what comes behind? And we talk every day about sustainability, and we are constantly trying to pivot away from any kind of dependency on what we do and how we do it. And that's what fundamentally resonates with me with localization, because most of the CSOs, most of the communities are not really, they don't have a mindset. And I love that my Papua New Guinea Wantok are nodding, because they know what I'm about to say. They don't want to put the hand out. And sometimes we in donor land see that and go, oh yeah, that's just a continuation of a kind of culture that's embedded or nested within our development space. But really what they're saying is, if you get out of the way and let us do what we want to do and go in the direction that we want to, you can enable us to get there faster and you can catalyze some of our ideas. But it does require us to tune into a different radio frequency. And there's so many barriers and obstacles. We've touched on some of them, but there are so many reasons why that's hard. And, you know, I like to think a good development practitioner is endlessly frustrated. Yeah, the moment you're content with what's happening is the moment perhaps you've been captured by some of the comfort, some of the safety, and we like to sort of be endlessly insecure. And, yes, sometimes we can be a very critical sector, and put ourselves under the microscope and perhaps unfairly at times. But ultimately, we are all allies. And, that the mutual oration kind of threw down the gauntlet to us to say, what is this next phase of development going to look like? Yeah, how are we going to forge and frame an agenda that can unite us and build the bridges in the countries and the communities that ultimately is what provides the gravity for our work? I am terrible with a microphone. So I will stop there because I'm sure that there are a few questions you'd like to put to Rany. She's as much a poet as a policy and project manager. Such wonderful kind of stories and allegories, that filter through and resonate. So please, I wish to invite any questions that you may have for Rany, and we can also at the same time open it up more generally. And I want to get a bit of a gauge to you at an emotional level and a personal level. What are you feeling right now? And you know what? Even if it's a sense of disappointment, did you think what you were going to get out of today was going to take you down a different pathway, going to get you further down the pathway? Because we bring a lot of emotion to what we try to typically convey as a discipline, because there's a lot of sense of how much do we invest, and we all pour a lot of heart and soul into what we do, and many of us have worked very long hours, and sometimes fruitless. So if localisation is actually going to go forward from here, it requires a different kind of personal level of investment. I'll stop. Questions, please. Nothing is off limits. You cannot offend.
Hello. Yes, I intend not to offend. I'm Anders Lemke Hogan. I'm with Adam Smith International. This is a question for Rany, but also more broadly as well. But picking up on your point around the next stage of development. This conversation, we've been talking about localisation, and it's within sort of the JEDC framework. JEDC is fairly broad. There are some big sort of pillars within JEDC. We've got this shift to localisation that we're seeing, DFAT releasing their localisation policy. Do you, as the panel, see JEDC breaking up at all in the future into their sort of component pieces? Do you think there will be a need to have specializations in sort of localization or like social inclusion? Can a single person be expected to implement JEDC effectively? I've worked with JEDC advisors who might do components quite well, gender equality, but other things they might not touch on. Or do we risk over-engineering or, I guess, obfuscating what we're trying to do by having a more specialised approach? And do you have any suggestions of how it should be incorporated? Is it just better organisational frameworks that promote localisation, or any answers from you guys? Thank you.
Yeah, good question. On whether it'll be, I can't speak for AUSAID. I'm with Canadian Global Affairs Canada, so I'm not sure which direction they're going. But with regards to JEDC and whether it'll be fragmented, I think it's just becoming a little more structured in a way. Just as in engineering, you might have a general engineer, mechanical engineer, biochemical engineer. I think within JEDC, you'll still have expertise. There will be times you'll need someone who's got an expertise on disability. There'll be times you'll need someone with an expert on LGBTQ, or in the Pacific, the different terminologies that we use there. But you may also need a generalist, just a general engineer. So I think there's actually what's happening is there's a little bit of growth within the sector and with localization. So I think there'll still be lots of opportunity. I don't see it becoming too fragmented. I think you'll still have these cross-cutting themes as a integrated. You'll want inclusion in general. And I think what donors will end up, the way I see it, rather than just adding, well, here's your disability section, your gender section, your indigenous section, your religion, it'll just be one kind of general inclusion. I think because the forms are just going to get too crazy. Mind you, we still make terrible forms. Yeah, they're all designed by committee, so that's the problem. So I hope that kind of touches on. For how to implement it, this kind of touches, I was hinting that I think where our partners have been successful at implementing JEDC, there's kind of three principles that kind of have been common to all of them. First and foremost, and maybe this is a Canadian in me, but they've taken a humble approach. They've recognized that, look, we in the West, we don't have all the answers. We've got our issues with gender equality. We're still nowhere near perfect. We have, double burden on women still in many cases. And so we really have to approach our partners to say, we can't come in with a lecturing attitude saying, look, you've got all these problems. You really got to fix your approach to how you engage with your wife or your women and preach to them in that way. I think we really have to meet them where they're at. And that comes with the humility. And I think the second principle is you kind of got to start on points you can agree on. And, having worked in the Middle East for a little while, there's a lot of religious tension and conflict between the two. But you can really start with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, because just as the title indicates, it's pretty universal. It's something that you can find. You might not agree on every principle. You might not have all religions agreeing or all societies agreeing with every principle, but generally there's enough there that you can agree on. They might not be familiar with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, so that might be part of your first discussion is what about these principles, and introducing them to them and just finding those points where you agree. But you got to start on those parts where you agree if you're really looking at integrating JEDC well. And then finally, I think you really just have to unleash your gender advisors. I think we've locked them up, put them in the closet, had them write the annexes, and just help on the proposal writing. But no, they've got to be part of the project and part of the design. They've got to be involved. And having worked in development for well over 20 years now, there's been a real evolution. We've gone from women in development, gender equality, now GBA plus. There's been a real evolution here. And I think we're getting to a point where we're getting really good at this. Some of our gender advisors are excellent. They're able to, because you're not going to convince people that they need to change things that they've been conditioned to accept their entire life. If you're like me, you grew up as a boy and you're thinking boys like blue, girls like pink, that's just the way it is, there's no problem. But there are gender problems and they're not being discussed. They're being left as taboo subjects, domestic violence, sexual assault. It happens, child abuse, but no one wants to discuss it. But our gender advisors are able to bring out these discussions in much better ways. I'm no expert. We rely on many of you civil society partners out here. You guys are doing an amazing job when I go up there and really getting them on board. But I think that's really what we have to do. We have to let these gender advisors use the tools they have and have them be much more part of our projects. Because it is, I used to think, at the beginning of my career, gender, how complicated is that? There's boys, there's girls, it's pretty simple. But obviously that's changed. And my own thinking has also changed, and I can credit that to some of the very strong gender advisors that I worked with. So, yeah. I don't know if somebody else wants to add.
Rany, did you want to
Yes,
touch
let
on
me
the Judge? Great.
Yes. Okay. That is very important and broad question, as you mentioned. That Jesse is very broad. Not everyone can hold or do everything alone. However, people mobilize together in order to improve the Jesse work. For CUFA, like we try to promote women with disability into our project intervention, and also in the project activity itself, we have the community development program that we push the participation from the women and people with disability to join that meeting and to raise up the voice in order to share their concern from the community. Like we cannot do anything straight away. However, we try to promote and provide the right-based training regarding to the Jersey in order to make the community people understand what is their right, and they can raise it to the community and to put into their community development program. Besides that, we also successfully include everyone into our project. So in terms of our project implementation, we can say we are successfully include the Jerseys. Not only the donor, the implementer of the project that need to include those. However, the women and the disability people themselves need to stand up by themselves as well. Because like, if you don't want to stand, maybe we cannot lift someone up. That's why the women, more and more women in Cambodia, they try to pursue their education to university or to study abroad. That's the way that they understand how to break the Gen or women barrier into the development or education system. This is very useful way that they can do. They try to break out the norm and the challenge and push themselves up. Like even those they are not treated fairly with the men before. However, now they can show that they can study higher education and lead things as the men do as well. So not only one side, but everyone participation is very important to push Jesse work to be successfully move forward and break the challenges for that. Yep, thank you.
Lovely. A few questions.
Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Armandina Guzman Amaral from Timor-Leste. Impressive work you are all doing. I'm particularly interested in Rany's explanations around tackling or influencing the social norms or the cultural norms where women aren't necessarily just marching around the kitchen. People with disabilities are not just staying at home. My question is, how did you influence the rest of the family? How did you bring them about if it has been embedded that their thinking is that my wife, my sister, my daughter should be around the house marching in the kitchen? How did you influence that? And in the implementation of the two projects, did you ever observe any backlash where men or in-laws are all of a sudden, why this woman is so busy? Or is it they're looking at it more from the positive side where they're actually bringing more income? So I'm keen to know that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for the question about the woman and the question from the woman. Yes, simply answer, how did our project bring in? We use the localization approach. We generate what the women need, and we study what their voice, what they want, what the capacity, what can they do. So when we learn all of those, And then we have to do the analysis. What can we do better? What can bring into the middle way in order to solve the issue that they have raised during our mobilizing approach or localization. So, when now not only CUFA that have the role to do that, but also the social media, it is play very important role to promote the women participation and disability inclusion as well. Because not just stay home, not just depend on your family. In Khmer word, we say, don't just open your eye in the morning and raise up the hand to ask the money from your husband, from your father to pay. You need to think what you can do to get the money. So, and then CUFA come to mobilize the idea, what you can do to get the skill, and then you can generate the income. It matches very well to the need of the women in the community who have just raised out the hand to ask for money. And then they start to think, why do I need just raise up my hand to ask for the money? Why don't I get a skill and earn by myself? And then when we come up with that idea, people start to participate with us. And then when they get the skill and then have the income, for sure, they, the positive and negative image still have, even though you are perfect, let's say, if the women are perfect, it's still, you have the skill, you have the knowledge, you have the certificate, but maybe you are unmarried, and then they say, oh, because you are so busy to study and you have no time to have love. Something like it. It's still, right? So when they have the skill, they are so busy, and then the family also, maybe sometimes they are happy, they have more income, but maybe less time to have the housework. However, with our examine, this is cannot compare to what they have earned. The skill that they have and the income that they generate, it can be higher than what is the negative image from the family. So those start to change that women should have their own decision, their own way to live their life as well, not just depend on the family to tell them what to do. So with CUFA project participation, we can view that based on our monitoring and evaluation. Women more participate, get the skill, earn the income, and more influence in the family as well. They are part of the income generation in the family. So they are not really the one who just depend on their husband or depend on the family. So income is very important, but the rights also important. When you have the income, it means that your rights better. Like in the family, you have more right. You can talk more. You can raise more idea, and you can participate to make the decision. So I can say that our project intervention, we have and push women out of the family that just treat them the independent one. In Khmer word, we say, like the frog in the well. So if there are women, disability, just stay home, don't see outside activity or any participation. It's like you are the frog in the well. You cannot see how big the world is. But when you come out, you join the project, you get the skill, you meet other people, and also you share your voice. It means that you will know how big is the sky. You are not just see the small one. So the improvement of the family decision making and voice, yeah, we can see that is improved based on our evaluation. Yeah.
Good. Thank you, Rany. I'm so sorry. I think there were one or two other questions, but we have run out of time. So I'll just leave you with this final thought, which is, there's an old saying, I think it might be in Tibetan, which is you can't pick up just one end of a stick, which means we can't just view localization as another funding modality. Now, alongside everything else, if we're genuine, we also need to be reflecting on how we change what we do and how we do it. And that is the collective challenge that I leave with all of you. Thank you so much for joining us. Please, round of applause for our great panel. Thank you, everyone. All right, cheers.